Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather with us tonight on the 7th of March. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. You can do that a lot of different ways. Social media is an easy answer to that. If you haven't done so, make sure that you've checked out our newest Facebook pages. Now, we're still posting under NWS Alaska. That's for the entirety of the state of Alaska. However, many of you asked for more localization to get a better view of what's going on closer to where you live and only where you live. If you didn't want to hear about the folks in Southeast when you're sitting in the interior, or you didn't want to hear about South Central if you're sitting in Southeast. We totally understand that. And because of that, we've made 3 new pages. NWS Juneau has their own page now. NWS Anchorage has their own page, and so does NWS Fairbanks, which means if you'd like to hear more about just the interior, follow NWS Fairbanks. That'll go for the North Slope and the West Coast as well. For Southwest Alaska, Bristol Bay, the Alaska Peninsula, all the way through the Aleutian Chain and east to Prince William Sound, and including the Valley, Matanuska and Sisseton, of course, and the Cook Inlet region, make sure you're following NWS Anchorage. And for Southeast, of course, the answer would be National Weather Service Juneau, NWS Juneau on Facebook. You can follow all 4, you can follow just one, you can follow just a mix, whatever makes sense to you and your situation. But we encourage you to check those out because the messages may be a little bit different at times, but you'll certainly get the full story at NWS Alaska, as you always have. You can follow us on Twitter as well. A lot of information there all the time. And if you're looking out west, you would have noticed some information shared today about the incoming wave of weather for the West Coast. Winter weather advisories, a new round has been posted for the west coast of the Seward Peninsula out towards St. Lawrence Island, and then from the Yukon Delta all the way up through Ambler, including the Selawik Valley and the Baldwin Peninsula. In these areas, the further north you go, chances are the less snow you're going to see out here around Kotzebue and the Selawik Valley, and then southward toward the Yukon Delta. About 1 to 3 inches of snow is expected here through Saturday, and about 2 to 4 inches of snow is expected in this region around the Selawik Valley until Saturday, from tonight through Saturday. Everywhere else, though, has a pretty decent chance of picking up about 3 to maybe as much as 7 inches of snow. There's also going to be some gusty winds there, which will lower visibility as that blows in. And as you can expect, this next wave of weather may have a hint of rainfall in it as well. The further south you go into southwestern Alaska, that especially will be true. In fact, you're probably seeing some of that today. This wave of weather is all associated with a very large area of low pressure out across the south and western Bering. But the other part of the story is the weather pattern is changing as we go through the rest of the week. So while you will experience some snowy and windy weather from tonight all the way through at least the first part of the weekend, behind this is a push of colder air that looks to be dropping southward and should also help to improve, or at least from where we are right now, a little bit more ice across some parts of the Bering Strait to about St. Lawrence Island, maybe some parts of Norton Sound, and certainly northward than that. A lot of open waters exist right now. Some of that will be filling in. How far south that goes remains to be seen, but it's certainly something that you should be aware of. Here's a look at the bigger weather picture as of earlier this morning. Low pressure, pretty evident there in this big swirl you see here across the west and southern Bering Sea. And out ahead of that, a fairly substantial southerly flow working up through south central, southwest, and all the way into the interior. This is pushing that very mild air northward. And as we go through time, we're going to see this wave of weather eject one wave of low pressure across south central Alaska as we head toward the weekend. And then this will reform and probably take more of a southerly route, which is going to bring some more wet weather towards southeastern Alaska. So you're in for some changes as well if you're watching from southeast tonight. As we watch the loop one more time, you'll notice that the main focus for those really bright white clouds that we've watched today had really been across southwestern Alaska. That's where areas of rain have been falling, and this is where we're going to see a little more snow a little further north tonight as that main corridor of moisture is working its way northward. But the other thing to keep in mind is ships at sea should be watching the weather here across the Aleutians and certainly from St. Paul out toward the Bristol Bay region. As we go through the next few days, high-end gales and probably storm-force winds will be more likely there as we go through tonight, tomorrow, and into Saturday for Bristol Bay as those stronger winds continue pressing eastward. So a lot of changes with the main corridor of low pressure, but certainly with that push of warm and wet air moving northward, and then the resulting cold weather that's dropping southward as we head into the weekend. Here's the lay of the land as it was today. Colder air up north, seen with a cold front. The triangles, of course, pointing the direction of that flow of cold air. The leading edge of that air mass is depicted with that blue line, telling us that it is a cold air mass dropping southward. Low pressures across the west and southwestern Bering Sea at 961 millibars. That's certainly not the lowest pressure we've seen in the Bering, but it is one that's creating a little bit of wind and certainly some chop out at sea, so be careful out there. It looks like some areas of rainfall around Adak and Atka. Snowfall with a little bit of a cold pocket around Nikolsky on Alaska and Dutch Harbor, and light rain spreading across the Alaska Peninsula and into Bristol Bay. But once we get into land, we're back in that cold territory again, and we're still seeing snow across inland areas up toward Lake Iliamna and then wrapping around into the Yukon Delta. Gamble and Savunga, we're reporting snow this afternoon. On the south ends of the Brooks Range, we're also seeing some light snow there, and then of course the North Slope, cold enough for snow at this hour. With low pressure sitting across the southern end of southeastern Alaska, that's enough to drag a little bit of drying wind into the panhandle. And we're seeing southerly winds and plenty of clouds across south central and really most of the interior. As we get into tonight, we're going to develop a wave of low pressure here on the north side of the Alaska Range. That should help to draw more air across some of the Chugach Range and probably the Talkeetnas and the Alaska Range. With that, we don't expect to see a whole lot of precipitation around the Anchorage area or the valley, but don't be surprised if you see a few snowflakes out there. It should not amount to a whole lot. Out across southwestern Alaska, a front, the one that we've been watching out west, will be pushing inland. That's still going to force the opportunity for snow to form across western Alaska. And like we said, some of that could start to add up again for many areas that are closer to the Yukon Valley and northward toward Ambler. You're probably looking at about 3 to 6, maybe 7 inches of snow. On the south end of that, around the Yukon Delta, by the end of the weekend, maybe about 1 to 3 inches of snow, and lesser amounts as well, about 2 to 4 around the Selawik Valley up toward Kotzebue. Low pressure will still be chugging along through the Bering, but you'll notice that number is coming up. That means the winds should be weakening, the seas will gradually lie down, and the storm is kind of losing its punch, but it's not gone yet. But what you do see is a new wave of low pressure reforming in its wake at 961 millibars. That's going to be the one to watch as we go through the rest of the weekend. As we get into Friday, a trough of low pressure here is kind of stretching its legs and moving across southeastern Alaska. It's kind of been there for a while, but it ebbs and flows a little bit. It will push once again all the way down the outer coast and allow more clouds and moisture to start to gather around there. As early as Friday afternoon, it wouldn't be a surprise to see some light snow across northern parts of southeast up toward Yakutat, and then a rain-snow mix around Prince William Sound. There's that low pressure system, the first one at 995 millibars. That's getting closer to Cook Inlet, Shelikof Strait, and Kodiak Island. This should help to bring some more wind across the Chugach and might help to boost temperatures up as we get into Saturday. Keep your eye on that. Out across the Brooks Range, the Yukon Valley, and then south and west, we're still looking at snowfall. And this will be that main quarter of snow that we were talking about with winter weather advisories. Try saying that 5 times fast. Out across the Seward Peninsula all the way down toward St. Lawrence Island. And about St. Matthew will be the corridor of some of that heavier snowfall, and this wave continues pressing eastward, but it's running into more dry and stable air as it does so through the weekend. So now we turn our attention to low pressure here across the western chain, and that's down to 956 millibars again. So it's deepening. It's doing its duty of bringing in quite a bit of wind across the region, and this will probably produce gales and storm force winds as it tracks across the southern Bering Sea. So as we get into Saturday, it looks like the corridor of some of those faster winds will be moving into Bristol Bay, and storm force winds certainly look like a possibility there. You'll also notice the pressure gradient tightening up here outside of Prince William Sound at Kodiak Island, and more wind will be flowing across the Chugach. This could make a pretty mild day across a large part of the Cook Inlet region, Anchorage included, and probably pushing some of that warmth into the valleys. So conditions might be a little mushy and slushy out there, so be careful if you're heading out. Across southeast, you'll notice weather has moved back into the region. Rainfall will pick up as we go through the rest of the weekend there and probably into early next week, especially as this front gets closer to you for Sunday and into Monday, which is much needed relief there from ongoing drought conditions across southern parts of southeast. Up north, areas of snow will continue across the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range all the way west of Arctic Village out toward Kobuk, Noatak, and out across the Chukchi coast. We do expect to see some stronger winds coming in from the north across the Chukchi coast and blowing into St. Lawrence Island. That north and northeasterly flow will be cold, and once this system passes, it should put a healthy dose of northerly winds into more parts of the northern Bering Sea. And with that, of course, and sea surface temperatures hovering around -1 to about 1 above, we do expect to see new ice growing in that area. One condition, though, we do have to see the winds slowing down, and once that wind drops off just a little bit more, there should be some pretty rapid growth in many areas across the Chukchi Sea and the northern Bering Sea. And once again, it really depends on how fast those winds lie down and how long that cold air can stay put for us to grow more ice in further southern locations. So, interesting weather situation to watch, and certainly one that's developing as we go through the rest of the weekend. Let's take a look at your temperatures here. In southeast, we're expecting low temps in the north to be in the mid to upper 20s, about 32 in Sitka, and mid to upper 20s as you head further southward toward Petersburg and Heidelberg and Craig, Metlakatla. Prince William Sound temperatures like Valdez 24, Cordova holding on to temps closer to 30, 33 in Kodiak, low to mid 20s for the Susitna Valley, 16 around Fairbanks, -3 around Arctic Village, and anywhere from about -5 to 5 above for the North Slope. Kotzebue Sound temps in the teens to low 20s, 24 in Nome. Unalakleet, you're looking about 27 with Galena near 19. Bristol Bay temperatures in the upper 20s to about 30 degrees. Mid to upper 30s for the Alaska Peninsula, 36 in Unalaska and around Dutch Harbor, 33 degrees for St. Paul, up to 37 on Friday. Very close to, but below freezing, it looks like, in Fairbanks tomorrow. 32 in Galena as you head up toward Ruby. Ambler, temps there cooling off a little bit more. Sub-freezing, though, as you get up toward Ambler. Bettles also in the mid-20s. 3 for Utqiagvik, 13 in Kaktovik. Mid to upper 30s, even 40 degrees across the outer coast and southeast. Looks like Homer could hold on to about 37. Overnight lows Saturday morning, 7 in Fort Yukon, 0 for Arctic Village. Single digits to about 10 for the North Slope, 26 in Nome, 24 in Kotzebue, upper 20s and lower 30s for South and Western Alaska, Lake Iliamna 32, 33 in Kodiak, 37 in Sandpoint, and high temperatures on Saturday could warm into the 40s for South and West.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
And on to aviation now. IFR conditions are going to be fairly widespread across the northern Bering into the Yukon coast and then down into Bristol Bay as we start up your Friday morning. You'll notice that southerly flow is also bringing up IFR conditions into a broad area around Kodiak Island and into Prince William Sound. Across the North Slope, generally north of the Brooks Range now, including Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass, you're going to see IFR conditions in the region and out toward Arctic Village and southward. Once you get down toward the Yukon Valley and the Tanana Valley, conditions should improve, though you're going to be dealing with marginal conditions, at least in the morning. And you'll notice now that that bright and clear situation across southeast has changed. By tomorrow morning, marginal conditions are creeping in all the way out toward Gustavus, southward toward Sitka, Petersburg, and past Heidelberg and up toward Hyder as well. But the further east you go into the inner passage up north, you're probably going to be looking at least a chance of VFR conditions holding out there. As we get into the afternoon, that really doesn't seem to change too much. Maybe fills in a little bit more around the Clarence Strait. Looks like IFR conditions will hold around Prince William Sound and across the western Alaska range. MVFR around Cook Inlet, but not necessarily over Anchorage, Lake Hood, up toward the valley there. You might find some decent breaks up toward Talkeetna, at least for a while. IFR conditions are expected across Norton Sound and St. Lawrence Island down toward St. Matthew, Nunivak Island down toward Cape Newenham, and then also east of Atka all the way out toward Unalaska and Dutch Harbor and just about to the southern end of the Alaska Peninsula. And IFR conditions are filling in now on the south side of the Brooks Range with a widespread area of VFR across the upper Yukon and even the upper Tanana Valley at times. Saturday morning, though, you can see that entire area shifting eastward. It looks like visibility and ceilings are going to drop across the Chukchi coast and across the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range, all the way out toward Ambler and Bettles, and then southward right along the Yukon Valley. So with a lot of air traffic moving across the region in the western sections out toward Nome, you might have a little bit of a hit and miss trouble there for Saturday morning into the afternoon. The west coast down toward the Yukon Delta, all looking IFR into the central Aleutians as well as parts of the Alaska Peninsula, especially the Pacific coast out toward Castle Cape and then north of Prince William Sound. And now the northern sections of southeast should go down as we get into Saturday morning with MVFR widespread across the southern end of the Panhandle. No big change through the afternoon for southeast on Saturday. You'll notice widespread MVFR now across Prince William Sound, the Copper River Valley, the Alaska Range, all the way around past the Talkeetnas as well. Areas around the west coast, a little bit of improvement there for Saturday afternoon, so the morning probably starts out not so great, But if you can hold for just a little bit and get through some hit and miss MVFR, you should be okay if you're moving back and forth from Galena, Caltag out toward Nome, and Shaktoolik there. So a little bit of improvement. As we look at the Brooks Range, you'll also notice some improvement there. Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass should improve at least a little bit, but you'll notice some lingering regions of IFR there. The Chukchi Coast, as well as areas around Wainwright and Utqiagvik, will be looking at IFR for Saturday afternoon. Here's your pass conditions in detail then. Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass, marginal, leaning toward IFR as we go through your Friday. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass look to be down most of the day. IFR conditions there, and for Rainy Pass, as we get into Windy Pass, probably holding around IFR most of the day. Isabel Pass may lean over toward marginal conditions as we go. Mentasta Pass sees improvement from marginal levels in the morning out toward VFR in the afternoon. Tanita Pass also looking at marginal levels throughout the day. Portage Pass, IFR conditions expected most of the day. And again, the change that we've been talking about for several days in southeast. Chilkoot Pass looking to go from VFR to MVFR. Same goes for the areas around Skagway and Haines. Now, 2 to 4, even 6,000 foot freezing levels there just south of the chain. No big change, though, for most of our areas near land. The surface freezing line holding right around Kodiak Island, Shelikof Strait, the Alaska Peninsula, and the outer coast of southeast. Everywhere, of course, in the morning will be below freezing. So if you are going to be flying up a little bit higher around the Chukchi Coast, below 1,000 feet, but above 3,000 feet, there does seem to be some substantial icing potential there. Above 4,000 feet for the Beaufort Sea Coast, and for the middle Yukon Valley and into places in eastern Norton Sound, that freezing level for at least isolated moderate is about 5,000 feet and higher. Above 4,000 to 5,000 feet for south central, creeping its way into southeast, and above 6,000 to 9,000 feet for many areas in the southern Bering Sea. The jet stream has high pressure sitting across the western Yukon, driving in that southerly flow, but the jet stream is shifting to the south, and that's going to drive more of that storm pattern across the Gulf in the coming days. Southerly winds continue up the west coast, anywhere from 30 to 50 knots. Southerlies also entrenched across the interior, 20 to 45. The wind's picking up across southeast now and coming in very lightly at 3,000 feet, but you can see that driving southerly flow across all of the mainland now, 25 to as strong as 50 knots in some cases. Turbulence picks up across the central and eastern chain below 4,000 feet to isolated severe.
The Tipsy Moon. Hey there, stargazers. I'm James Albury, director of the Kika Silva Pla Planetarium in Gainesville, Florida.
And I'm Dehne Regas, astronomer for the Cincinnati Observatory. We're here to help you find your way around the sky. I really love seeing the moon on crisp, cool evenings, and I have to say my favorite moon phase is a crescent.
Oh yeah, there's nothing better than seeing a slim crescent moon hanging just above the horizon, shining through the twilight.
This weekend, you will see exactly that, and we'd like you to look for 2 extra details.
First, when you look at a crescent moon, you can sometimes also see the darker part of the moon cradled in the illuminated sliver.
And secondly, maybe you've noticed that the moon can appear tipped over. Sometimes a crescent moon can look like a smile or a bowl.
And at the end of this week, you can look for both of these things. Let's show you.
Okay. We have our sky set up for this Saturday night, March 9th at 8 p.m. facing west. We'll have to spring forward on Sunday, but for now, we're using Eastern Standard Time.
There's that slim crescent moon. It's pretty as a picture. Now, when the moon is a crescent, you can not only see the part of the moon illuminated by the sun, but you can also see the shadowy outline of the darker part of the moon.
This is called Earthshine. What's happening is the sunlight is reflecting off the Earth and bouncing up to light up the moon, just barely.
This subtle light can't compete with the direct sunlight, but the Earth is pretty reflective, especially because from the moon, they are seeing a full Earth.
Whoa, man, this is getting a little deep. We better fly up to the moon to see this for ourselves.
One half of the moon always faces the Earth. So if you lived on the near side of the moon, like on the Dehne Regas Memorial Moon Base, you would always see the Earth in the sky.
Hey, I'm not dead yet.
Oh, sorry, just the Dehne Regas Moon Base.
Oh, that's better. Anyway, from here, over the course of a month, you would see the Earth go through phases.
But the trick is, the phase of the Earth is opposite the phase of the moon. So, when there's a full moon on Earth, there's a new Earth on the moon.
And when the moon is new, the Earth appears fully illuminated, if you're standing on the moon.
So, when the moon is a crescent from Earth, the Earth will appear to be almost full from the moon.
And a nearly full Earth reflects enough sunlight up to the moon to allow you to see it, just barely.
Now, back on Earth, have you ever seen the moon tipped over like this just after sunset? Chances are, if you have, it was in February or March.
The moon appears to move across this imaginary line called the ecliptic. It's basically the plane of our solar system and where you can find the moon, sun, and all the planets.
At this time of year, the ecliptic is almost vertical to the western horizon after dark. So, as the night goes on, the moon seems to tip over.
It's not really tipping over, but merely appears to do so since we're viewing the sky from a sideways angle on a spinning sphere.
And the angle of the tilt depends on where you're viewing from. From more northerly latitudes like Alaska and Canada, the tilt is very small.
From the mid-latitudes of the United States, the moon can almost tip completely over.
And from places like South Florida, Texas, Mexico, and Hawaii, you can get a fully tipped over moon smiling at you.
You can see this tipped over moon and Earth shine for a few nights. On Sunday night, the moon will have moved higher in the sky and grown a little lighter, but as it gets later in the night, it will tip over again.
And you should notice a bright orangish looking star nearby on the 10th and 11th. That's the planet Mars. So, make sure to look for Earthshine this weekend and the tipped over smiling moon.
And imagine what the Earth might look like from a lunar landscape. It's all there when you keep looking up.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And now on to your marine weather. You'll notice over the next several days that at least new ice will be forming around the Bering Strait region and the Chukchi coast. We expect to see some of this also pushing through the Bering Strait with northerly winds developing. Sea surface temperatures right now are about 0 to -1 across the northern parts of the Bering and into Norton Sound. South of that, though, temperatures warm up fairly quickly, especially south of St. Matthew Island. So the best chances for any new ice growth as we head into the weekend will generally be around St. Lawrence Island, into Norton Sound, and the northern Bering Strait. So watch for changes there, and probably some rapid changes once those north and even northeasterly winds set into the region. As we look at Friday in southeast, winds are going to come up a little bit more. On the inside waters, not too bad, 10 knots, 2 to 4 foot seas. On the outer coast, anywhere from 10 to 20 knots, with 6 to 8 foot seas, the highest of which will be out around Icy Cape, Cape Fairweather, and out around Yakutat. 10 to 15 the further south you go, with 6 foot seas there. But then by Saturday, you'll notice a sharp increase there in those southerly winds, about 25 knots, 12 to 13 foot seas, anywhere from 15 to 25 knots across the inside, with 3 to 5 foot seas growing, especially in the north there, with 11 to 12 foot seas in the northern Gulf. And as you look at south central, you'll notice easterlies coming up inside of Prince William Sound, 7 foot seas there, 10 to 11 foot seas across the northern Gulf, inside of Cook Inlet, 3 to 9 foot seas, the highest of which will be around the Barrens, 9 to 11 foot seas, in fact, for your Friday. As we get into Saturday, a sharp contrast there as low pressure is moving over Kodiak Island and really channeling that south and easterly flow. That's going to have a pretty big impact on the temperatures, but at sea, you'll notice a kind of a dangerous situation developing here with winds coming up to 45 to 50 knots over the Barrens. 17 to 19 foot seas are expected there. Inside of Prince William Sound even, a notable increase to 6 foot seas on that 25 knot wind. And north and easterlies coming down northern Cook Inlet, anywhere from 20 to 40 knots there before you get to Kenai. As we look at Friday in Bristol Bay, again, a developing situation. The Friday itself won't be too terribly bad. 20 to 30 knots there on the Bering Sea coast, 6 to 11 foot seas, and 20 to 25 knots across the North Pacific with 11 to 17 foot seas building into Sand Point. But Saturday is going to be remarkably different. In fact, storm force winds again showing up here just as we saw in the last chart, with 35 to 50 knot winds surrounding Kodiak Island, 30 to 50 knots across the southern Bering Sea coast of the Alaska Peninsula, and 40 to 50 knots here from Castle Cape to Chignik, and all the way out to Sand Point with 20 to 27 foot seas building into the region. So again, use extra caution there as you're moving about on Saturday. For the Aleutians, conditions should be improving there, at least briefly on Friday. 35 to 40 knots in the general area with about 14 to 18 foot seas across the central Bering Sea coast there, and 40 to 50 knots there as you head eastward. You'll see some higher winds and seas, but generally south of the chain, looking at about 40 knots, 21 to 22 foot seas, and 14 to 19 foot seas out west, with conditions changing as low pressure moves through. And then once we get a really strong northerly push moving in, you'll notice those northwesterlies setting into the chain, anywhere from 30 to 35 knots. About 16 to 18 foot seas there. Some places like in between may get caught up in that higher swell. 22 foot seas expected with that strong northerly quarter of winds moving through. And then east of that, we're still dealing with some pretty high seas, anywhere from 28 to 34 foot seas south of the chain, and 15 to 20 on the northern coast there with 35 to 40 knot winds. So Saturday will be a little bit more rough and tumble. For Friday, north and easterly winds south of St. Lawrence Island. Look for a southeasterly wind holding on to Norton Sound though. Southerlies, 25 knots, 15 foot seas around St. Paul and St. George, with more of an east and southeasterly flow coming up the southwest coast. As we get into Saturday, you're going to see a really big mix. Storm force winds still blowing through the region. 35, 45, even 50 knot winds coming down southwestern Alaska with 13 foot seas, 15 knots though, and holding on to kind of a lull in the action south of the front. 15 knots with a 12 foot sea around St. Paul and St. George, and easterlies blowing over Norton Sound with 4 foot seas coming off of 30 knots. North and easterly winds for the Beaufort Seacoast on Friday. Northeasterlies coming down the Chukchi, 15 to 20, 30 knots through the Bering Strait with a 9 foot sea, 11 foot seas over the open waters there on Saturday. Again, bringing in some of that colder air, 35 knots. Look for east and northeasterly winds for the Beaufort, 15 to 20 and 25 knots over the Chukchi coast. A lot going on in the next couple days. Pay attention to the weather on the west coast, especially with the winds coming around to the north. In the meantime, watch for snow across parts of the west coast from the Yukon Delta all the way up toward Kotzebue and the Selawik Valley. Winter weather advisories are in effect tonight, and we'll go through at least about midday on Saturday. Generally speaking, 1 to 3 inches around the Yukon Delta, 2 to 4 up around Kotzebue, and in between, a better chance for about 4 to 6, maybe even 7 inches where you are. Winds will come up on Saturday for south central. Weather's moving into southeast as we head toward the end of the weekend with a better chance of rain, especially in the central and southern parts of the Panhandle going through the weekend. Have a good one.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.